So I was just being enlightened about Dr. Jude Capper, Februdairy, and I guess this is kind of the latest attempt to revalorize the dairy industry and cattle farming in general. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about the dairy industry worrying about the rise in plant milks. They are worried, even though they're denying such. It seems so. And Jude Capper, or Dr. Jude Capper, she's an independent livestock sustainability consultant. And she was, last year, she was Women's Dairy Woman of the Year, something like that. So she's very important. And she coined the whole concept of #Februdairy, which was kind of a response to Veganuary.
Right.
They were like, let's have Februdairy, 20 plus positive posts about dairy in order to promote dairy and debunk the myths that are coming out, allegedly, about dairy itself. And what's interesting about that, and Mod Vegan and people in the VDDS have been talking about this a lot, it's very interesting how the dairy industry is responding and how they are trying to allegedly debunk myths. And they are trying to come out as transparent. They're really banking on this idea of being transparent. But when they are asked basic questions about the practices, they can't answer. Or they block you.
Look, I find it weird too. I mean, some of the things meat eaters eat, I have to recognize historically have been crucial to human survival. So I was talking with Melissa the other day in terms of not really human evolution, but the history of just the last 5,000 years. The reason why most cities are located where they are is due to access to fish.
Yep.
That definitely includes the history of Scotland and Eastern Canada, by the way. Fish was an almost infinite source of protein for human beings in the last 5,000 years. Now, believe me, sir, I'm a vegan. In case you didn't know watching this video, I don't think it's morally justifiable in the year 2018 to eat fish. But I can recognize historically the entire population of Japan and Scotland and even Cambodia was located where it was due to the availability of fish. So, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, it reached a peak population of about 1 million people living in one city. Now, it was actually more like a giant suburb. They didn't have high-rises or skyscrapers. They all lived in little houses. But still, they got about 1 million people in total. How? Fish was crucial to that. Yes, also rice and what have you. But they were living in a swamp. They were living in a tropical swamp with a lot of fish protein sitting around. So, I mean, I can recognize that. But, whenever we buy food, almost the first thing we look at, even within a vegan diet, is just the ratio of fat to protein. And there is no justification for eating, camembert. There's no justification for eating cheddar, now or ever. The dairy products we eat, sorry, not me because I'm vegan, but we as a society eat, they're so obviously poison. You know what I mean? Like, there's a level on which I can't argue that you shouldn't eat fish in terms of your health in this obvious sense. You know what I mean? I recognize, and the stats that show vegans are tremendously healthy, when you look at the epidemiology, there are pescatarians who are very healthy also. Now, believe me, sir, I'm not letting them off easy. There are serious health problems caused by eating fish, including exposure to mercury. I personally knew one man who had destroyed his health permanently by eating fish because he got mercury toxicity. I believe it's called Miyamoto's syndrome, but it may or may not be. But anyway, mercury exposure to fish destroyed his life, and that's it. He horrible, but he's not dead. He's trapped in a kind of living death due to this, mercury exposure. He had terrible permanent health damage from it. So that is very scary and very real. But on a fundamental level, dairy products are just a blob of fat. I mean, it's unbelievably unhealthy for you. And, I don't, so, I mean, there are a million other reasons to not eat dairy. There are a million other reasons to be vegan, ethical and ecological and health and everything else. But, I don't get it. And look, keeping it real, I have mentioned this before. I was briefly employed behind the cheese counter at a Whole Foods market. I remember mentioning that back when Joe Vegan was still vegan and he was on YouTube. Because Joe Vegan would make a big deal about how he worked in a grocery store and he was so poor and oppressed compared to me. I said, hey, I used to work in a grocery store too. I used to work at Whole Foods Market. I worked behind the cheese counter. And the particular location I was at, we did get a lot of, slender women coming in asking me for advice on what kind of cheese they should eat to lose weight or remain slim. And the advice I gave them every time, and they would often be asking me this holding in their hands so-called low-fat cheddar, which is still really high in fat. And every time what I said to them, which was very good advice, I said, if that's the case, the only cheese you should eat is Parmesan. Because Parmesan is very strong tasting and you can grate it over the food you eat. And I said, what you need is to use something like Parmesan, something with a very, very strong taste, so that you eat very little of it. Because the only way to have low-fat cheese is to not eat cheese, or to eat as little cheese as possible. Which is what something like, if you're using a trivial amount of Parmesan, then the negative effect on your health is better. So this is obviously me, before I was vegan, working behind a cheese counter. And I didn't know any of the detailed stuff I know now about dairy products and health impacts and so on. But it's just blindingly obvious in terms of the protein to fat ratio, which is what you're eating. Why is this part of the human diet at all? Why do human beings eat ice cream and butter and cheese? It's really insane. Sorry, I'm keeping it real, but I mean, it's...
Keep it all the way around. No, I'm going to send you something now, actually, and it's by the Farmers Weekly, and it's the Farmers Weekly themselves trying to debunk the myths spread about dairy itself, and there's one about health, and they put it as a myth, and you may see if you read it, it's not even a myth because they concede to it. But even with their arguments, that they're trying to stillman themselves as much as possible.
Right.
There's one myth here. 2, here's the myth. Taking carbs from their mothers is harmful. Their response is, or Jude Kappa's response is, activist groups are highly skilled at creating conscientious messages which resonate with consumers, and the suggestion carbs are forcibly removed from the cow, with the cow often cited as bellowing for days afterwards, is a popular anti-dairy message. Maternal ability is a desirable trait in beef cows, which often calve outside or unsupervised, but has been neglected to some degree in dairy breeding programs. Therefore, contrary to popular belief, here's their argument. Not all cows are interested in caring for the calf during the first crucial 24 hours of life. So what they're saying is, not all calves really care about their children in the first 24 hours, but they don't want to hear about the ones that do, or the fact that maybe after they would care. This is how ridiculous it is. This is them. This is Dr. Jude Kappa at her best.
Yeah, right.
Oh, not all cows. Actually, not all cows.
Because obviously the dairy farming industry is based on what cows would prefer, their preferences.
Oh,
yeah, these people have no sense of fair play. But I mean, the weird thing is, so I used to live on the border between Spain and France, where the debate about bullfighting was still ongoing, So region by region, they were having referenda. They were having ballots. They were voting on whether or not to ban bullfighting forever. And I knew other vegans there. So when I lived in Perpignan, I think I knew all 4 vegans who lived in Perpignan. This is right on the Catalan border between France and Spain. There were very, very few vegans there, but some of the more serious activists. And it just seemed hilarious, the arguments, the debates being had about bullfighting. Like, well, torturing an animal to death in public for human entertainment. Sorry, we were just talking about it a minute ago. Is it okay to eat honey or oysters or something? That's a little bit more understandable. This is torturing an animal to death just for human entertainment. But, on the other hand, as ridiculous as it may sound, what they do with those bulls, it has more of a sense of fair play than, what we do with dairy cows every day. I mean, it's moral insanity. I think most people are shocked when they first learn that the cows never even get to have sex. Like a cow never gets to have sex with a bull. They get a human hand shoved up their anus in order to direct a needle that's inserted in their vagina. And that's their whole life, is living beneath a steel sky, inside a steel cage, and so on. So, it's insane to say that somehow milk production conditions are based on what the cow desires or appreciates, that the cow would prefer that you murder and eat its child rather than leave them together. I mean, when the only life you've known as a cow is living inside a steel cage. I mean, the whole frame of reference for it is just insane and incoherent. But yeah, the Spanish, in terms of a sense of fair play, when they do that stuff, the running of the bulls, they accept that every year the bulls are going to kill a few people. The bulls will kill a few bullfighters, kill a few people in the streets. As I mean, obviously, like it's laughable from a vegan perspective, the debate surrounding bullfighting. But, actually, when you think about it, it's more morally acceptable and more morally justifiable than what goes on invisibly in the milk industry every day.
Yeah, the moral courtesy is just not considered. Here's two examples right now. I just brought out a video for Februdairy, and it was an 80-year-old man. He was caught shoving his whole arm up the anus of a cow, and then he fiddled with himself. Oh. He wasn't punished for causing the cow any harm. He was charged for public indecency.
His mistake was doing it in public.
And the irony was this was a dairy farm.
Yeah. Oh, well.
And one of the lines in it was from the farmer herself, and she was like, "We are disgusted. We gave no one permission to touch our cows. Yeah. We see them as family." And I was just like, you right. Probably, for the safety of yourself, because it's safer for the farmers and for the cows allegedly, to artificially inseminate them. Right. So these 150 cows you've probably done the exact same thing to, because they were literally about to milk them, all of them.
Right. Yeah.
So they have had to have been, and I was just like, wow, this is public indecency, but it's fine for the farmers to do it. And here as well, here's another myth, and it's not a myth because in the sentence they concede it. Myth number 6, male dairy cows are often shot on farm.
Yeah.
And they say, yes, a lot do get shot, but I think it's a small percentage, and we can reduce these numbers further by improving sexed semen. I'm just like, okay, one being shot is a bit of a problem, but okay. Mm-hmm. If we can construct the supply chains that need Holstein beef, there are good returns available. The company which takes ours has a really good route onto market that is now totally dependent on dairy-bred beef. They also say that beef quality is as good as any other breed. So they're still going to get shot, and it's about the quality.
Well, two responses to this, one of which is quick and one of which is more long and deep. So we're living now, our new apartment, brand new apartment, our newly recarpeted apartment, is on Vancouver Island. So Vancouver Island is not Vancouver. It's an island next to Vancouver. On that whole island, all cattle, all male or female, are executed by rifle, by gun. They don't have any slaughterhouses. And economically, it's not viable to put them on a ferry boat, take them across to a slaughterhouse, and take them back again. So I'm living within the Western world, the modern Western world, one of the few areas where there are no slaughterhouses. It's all old-fashioned bullet to the head execution. So it would be nice if we get a car. Currently, we're pedestrian and bus only. We could drive out and probably interview some of those guys who shoot cows in the head. We could probably film them doing it, talk to them about how they feel about it. So we're still in the 18th century that way. I mean, there was a time when the modern factory slaughterhouse didn't exist. But Vancouver Island, as far as I know, is still living in that era. Again, for purely economic reasons. And, I'm not convinced at all. I don't know if getting shot in the head is any better or worse than being killed in a slaughterhouse. It's probably better. At least they get shot in the head outdoors. No, it's ridiculous. But if you ask yourself, would you rather die by being shot in the head in a field or brought into a meat processing factory and killed the way those cows are killed? I hate to tell you, but shot in the head in a field might win. I don't make any real ethical distinction between the stainless steel slaughterhouse and dying on the mud. Unless you think bleeding to death on steel is morally superior to bleeding to death on grass and mud, I don't see it that way. So that's one interesting thing, and that is really an opportunity for activism. Because I think if we did get out and talk to those people, just like normal human beings, I think, you know what I mean? I didn't scream at them, meat is murder and speciesism is the root of all oppression. Just talk to them about their lives. Probably those people would be an interesting insight into the back into.
Yeah, that's why I find outreach the best option for activism, because you're on a stool, you've got things to offer, and people approach you. They want to know what it is, and the people who are curious will come up, and then you talk about their lives and you appeal to them as human beings, and I think that's the best way.
Well, the second thing is, so for you in Scotland, I think this will be part of your life inevitably, because the connection between India and England is so strong. But these discussions about cow rights are on another level in India, because in India they believe in animal rights for cows, but only cows, not bulls, not steers, so not the male of the species, only the female, and not for water buffalo. For buffaloes generally, I think they have a couple species of buffalo. So other bovines that are almost more or less identical to cattle, but they do not consider them cattle. They're not Bos indicus as a species. They have a different shape of horn. So you have a totally surreal situation where people want to believe that milk is good and morally pure, because that's what it says in the Vedas, that's what it says in classical Hindu texts. Milk and butter are pure and sacred, and butter oil they think of as the ultimate food. But they want to believe that the production of milk is not exploiting the cows or is not harming the cows. They want to believe cows are sacred. And then at the same time, a totally cavalier attitude towards killing and even eating the male of the species, and the exploitation and killing of these buffalo species, which make buffalo milk cheese, by the way. They are exploited for their milk, not just their meat right adjacent to it. So I think any detached observer can look at that and say, this is not sustainable. And I don't mean ecologically sustainable. I mean like psychologically sustainable. It's not possible for more than 1 billion people in India to look at this. Just sit back and look at it. And it'll be on YouTube. That's the reality. It's not going to be on mainstream TV. It's going to be 1 billion people sooner or later looking on YouTube at the reality of where milk comes from. And look at the reality of, here's what you call a cow and here's what you call a buffalo. Like, talk about hashtag speciesism. Most vegans are making arguments like, what's the difference between a pig and a dog? Like, what's the difference between a cow that has horns shaped like this and a cow that has horns shaped like that? Like, there's just a cow and a buffalo. This is speciesism gone amok. One is sacred and one's just a filthy animal, apparently. It seems to me completely inevitable, not out of necessarily the strength of Hinduism, but out of the weakness of Hinduism and the breakdown of Hinduism in the 21st century reevaluation. Out of that mess of what's left over of Hinduism and Buddhism, it seems to me inevitable that there's going to be a huge impetus towards veganism, and definitely against dairy, specifically against dairy. This is just not sustainable.
Yeah, it really does show, how far the arbitrary line goes. The horns are the thing that make the difference, but it's because we permit arbitrary distinctions as justifications. So I'm not surprised it goes extreme as that, where you can be like, oh, well, this one is sacred and this one's not. And we do that with everything, like dogs. If you look at a pig and a dog, they're really not that different. Like, pigs are essentially, dogs with hooves. Obviously, they have a different kind of biology and diet, but when you look at their behavior, very similar. There's not much. Say, if obviously when people have them as pets, you can see they're not that different. But we do both of them arbitrary distinctions.
Both of them in the wild would also attack and kill humans very gladly.
Exactly.
Dogs would also prefer to eat humans rather than work for us, and wild boars would too. Yeah. Did you want to say something more, dear? Sorry, just Melissa, do you want to say something more about the milk myths and misconceptions? I mean, I think we could heap scorn on this for hours.
No, it's disgusting. Yeah, it's just horrible to read.
Yeah, I remember, so again, this is before I had a YouTube channel. This is pigs rather than cows. But I had this blog about veganism, and I remember a hog farmer replied to a post I had also commented on or something. I don't think it was my post.
Hog farmer on Tumblr, huh?
Oh yeah. No, I talked to several. I talked through that platform, through my blog. It is. I talked to hog. Yeah. They're out there trying to get laid too. I mean, ultimately, most of this social media is fueled by dating. I mean, it's fueled by wanting to have sex with members of the opposite sex or members of the same sex or both.
Especially on Tumblr.
Sure. If you're a hog farmer, how do you meet people? You spend all your time in a fucking shed killing animals.
There's a dating site called Farmers Only.
Is there actually?
Do they have a vegan category? Do they have a vegan Farmers Only? Can I click on the vegan button and only date other vegan farmers? That's what I'm looking for. All right. vegan male farmer seeks same. Anyway, looking to share an apartment above a pig shed. Yeah. It's a hog shed, but the smell isn't too bad. Anyway, there was a hog farmer who replied, and it was a photograph that a whole bunch of vegans were commenting on that just showed, the mother cow, a mother sow, female pig, in a steel cage that really didn't allow her to move at all, and then the piglets drinking from her teats. It was just this kind of unbelievable image of exploitation taken beyond taken to the nth degree, whatever you want to say. And the hog farmer wrote back and said, like, oh, well, you see, this is the sort of thing where activists really make it mislead you with these kinds of photographs. He said, what's really going on here is that, you're preventing the pig from hurting itself or accidentally crushing her own piglets, because that can happen. He just provided this kind of commentary on it, which in no way refutes or challenges the moral problem vegans are pointing out here. I think a lot of people responding to this photo are not vegan. They're just not morally insane. They can just look at this and say, something's really wrong with this picture. Something's really wrong. This isn't the myth of happy meat I bought into. You know what I mean? This isn't the picture on the side of my box of animal crackers or something. You know what I mean? This isn't the life I thought these pigs had before they were killed for our entertainment, Anyway, I just say that was weird to see that. But, what can I tell you? Stupidity is real. And, I think, one of the functions of intelligence, this actually comes back even to Arthur Schopenhauer's theory of what is intelligence and what is stupidity, is discerning between what is salient and what is irrelevant. And some people are so stupid that you can just present them with a totally irrelevant fact. Like, I don't know, in the wild, sometimes female pigs will accidentally crush their own children. I guess that must be true. It must happen once in a while. Humans do that accidentally too. It's a problem. The way you sleep while you're breastfeeding, if you fall asleep while breastfeeding, you have to be careful you don't crush your own baby. And humans do it, so I guess pigs do it. Therefore, steel sky, concrete floor, steel cage, millions of tons of pig flesh beer, all justified. Any contradiction, any more question, dismissed. Oh, well, that sets my mind at ease. If you can't see the difference between what's relevant and what's irrelevant there, it's mind-blowing to me. But stupidity is real. And as we were saying under a very different heading, an hour ago or something, we all have to live in a society together. We're not going to form a society that's only smart people. I can't even put together a vegan activist group that's only smart vegans. We got plenty of idiots in veganism too. We all got to learn to work together and cooperate and try to make something positive. As stupid as we may be individually or collectively. We got to focus on doing the best we can.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say about this hashtag Februdairy. We watched a video on Deutsche Welle, and it was not pro-vegan. It was really about, it was pro-dairy farmer. And it was talking about how there's so many limits on the profitability of dairy now, and how to make money off of it, they have like huge supplies of powdered milk that they have to do something with. So they're sending it to countries in Africa, and it's a huge mess. And I don't even think it's the plant milks that are infringing on the dairy profits.
Profitability, dairy profitability.
I think it's really just the industry is closing in on itself. So
yeah.
That's what I appreciated about this whole hashtag Februdairy thing, is so many vegans were just assuming it was a vegan thing, because so many vegans are young, and the young people own the internet. They'll meme the living daylight out of anything they don't like, and that's exactly what we've been doing, over and over again. Like, one of the people who brought it to our attention within the BDDS was Ethologic, who's also known as Tim. He and I had a big stream where he was trying to explain Jude Kappa, and that's how I came to know it. And relentlessly, we've been trying to ask her the simple questions. There were no ad homs, there were no insults, and the transparency between the vegans and the dairy industry. You can see who's telling the truth and who's not. But it is showing a desperation, I think.
Look, there are a lot of things in life. I just say sometimes you ask what's acceptable, and sometimes you ask what's optimal. So a very different moral problem from my perspective is prostitution. I've lived in Thailand, where there's a lot of prostitution. And I don't think I'm ever going to live in a society where there is zero prostitution. How much prostitution should we tolerate as a society? That's very difficult to answer. It really is, sincerely. I think no matter where you are on the political spectrum, if you aren't being an insane ideologue, and there are feminist ideologues, and there are Muslim ideologues, and Catholic ideologues, the answer isn't 0, and the answer isn't 100, and it's really hard to draw the line on that about what's tolerable, what's acceptable, and what's optimal. But the bizarre thing when you're looking at something like cheese or milk, or the ecological impact of the beef and dairy industry, setting aside even the ethical consideration, if you ask what is the optimal amount of cholesterol in the human diet, the answer is 0. What is the optimal amount of cheese in the human diet? Not tolerable, optimal. The optimal amount of cheese in the human diet is 0. What is the optimal amount of cow blood and cow poo and cow piss you want in this river, the River Thames, let's say, but any river? The optimal answer is 0. And that is completely attainable. I don't think even if we want, I don't think we could ever have a society with 0 prostitution. It's never going to happen. A society with 0 cow milk and 0 cow shit in the River Thames is completely attainable. All you have to do is, what you and I and all these other vegans do every day. Sorry, I'm within arm's reach of a whole bunch of vegan food products here. To us it comes naturally at this point. We know how easy it is, and yes, we also know how hard it is in some ways. We know the ways in which it's hard or challenging. But I do think it's much harder to make that argument about something like fish or lobsters that don't have the same externalities and the same obvious health damage. But I've said this. I've used the example of leather shoes all the time. It's like, I'd contrast, leather shoes to scientific research that involves torturing animals. That, again, is, I don't think we can live in a society with 0 scientific research that tortures animals, 0 vivisection. I don't think we can. It's horrifying, but I don't think 0 is attainable. I think that's another difficult question of how much are we going to tolerate, where are we going to draw the line, etc. When is scientific research so important that you get to torture rats to death? I think that's really worth answering, even though I accept we have to kill rats when there's an infestation. There are all other situations in which we have to kill rats. I think that's still an important question to ask and to have government guidelines for. In England, you have government guidelines. Whether or not they're good, you do have that stuff written out in law in England. In some countries, it's very much up in the air. It's very much undetermined, But unlike, medical research, why should we tolerate any leather shoes? Tolerance is irrelevant. Why should we tolerate any cheese? Tolerance is irrelevant. The optimal amount is 0. And none of us have to sacrifice or suffer to achieve that target. So anyway, sorry, I've been on people talk about being pragmatic within veganism. I think part of being pragmatic is also recognizing the situations where you don't have to compromise. All kinds of things we have to compromise on. But this is not one of them.
Actually, I was going to say as well, there's a video of Jude Kappa being interviewed, and she's trying to promote the positive sides of dairy. And the 2 examples, it may have been 3, the only few examples she could come up with were the cows themselves and cheese sandwiches.
Yeah.
Those are her examples. And I was just like, well, isn't it great?
Yeah.
That we then don't have to compromise, and we can still appreciate cows or any bovine creature, and we can have cheese sandwiches. They just don't have to come from the nipple of a cow.
Yeah. I used to do humanitarian work, and I saw a completely humorless argument about how dairy fat was more effective in causing humans to gain body weight, humans to get fat. And that therefore, in humanitarian work, we should be prioritizing, it was, I think, canned butter. There's this type of butter that doesn't need refrigeration. I don't think anyone in the Western world is capable of eating it. It's really horrible.
Canned butter.
Yeah, it's these really awful processed third world dairy products. But it was like, well, yes, if your definition of something being healthy is, in a refugee camp, it makes people get fatter quicker. Well,
understand those
why
shapes,
should they
they're
eat
more
Brussels
expensive.
sprouts? Why eat broccoli if your objective is to gain as much body fat as possible? But yeah, I mean, once in a while you read these things that are really sincere, that are making that kind of argument. I mean, I've read Led a Strange Life, so I've actually read some arguments like that, which are about refugee camps. You know, they're about really weird situations. But obviously, most of the people engaged in these debates are not being sincere. Sometimes they're making money out of the industry, but sometimes it's also just not being honest with yourself. And I don't know. I mean, I'm lucky. I've in some ways I've led a really wonderful life. In some ways, my life has been indescribably horrible. But you know, I at least have had the time to really think all these things through. And a lot of people work a 9-to-5 job or work 10 and 12 hours a day, and you know they get to a pretty right. They living in that harried way, that unexamined life. They get to age 45. And they're asking themselves questions for the first time that my daughter was asking me at age 4.5. My daughter was asking me a lot of questions about veganism, you know, and she was emotionally invested too. We weren't building up for it. You could see it was a big deal to her emotionally already at age 4.5, you know. So yeah, I do like that about veganism. I've said to you at some point, and this came up in conversation like once in the last year, but you know, so my parents were communists. And being raised communist, I was really aware this was an ideology so simple that it was really like children could completely understand it. Children could appreciate it, you know. Killing all the rich people. That's a really simple message that like a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old can really understand. This was my family religion growing up, you know. The workers will rise up and kill all the rich people. Got it! And you, as a kid in school, you could look around your classroom and be like, when the revolution comes, they're going to kill him first. You know, I'm not joking. This is before 1989.
That kid's got the best toys.
You're right.
He's going first.
It is childlike in its simplicity. And, you know, I think a lot of world religions are like that. I think Catholicism is probably a religion only children can appreciate. Maybe after age 10, Catholicism becomes impossible to appreciate. You know what I mean? But, you know, veganism is simple enough for children to understand. And in this case, that's not a terrible, evil, regrettable thing. It's simple enough for children to understand, and then it's true, it's complex enough that a bunch of us middle-aged people can debate for hours and hours how to implement it.